Hello, the 31st here. How's it going? Welcome to the Pokeworld Biology Season 1 finale, which has apparently just become the breeding season. After episode 4, I was asked a very interesting question. How do Pokemon of different species breed? I have forgotten who asked that question because it's been a really long time, so sorry about that. Wailord and Skitty are obviously the most obvious, or I guess famous examples of interspecies breeding in Pokemon, because it's just so wrong. But it happens, and I wanted to find out how, and that's what this video is about. So with that, the intro is over, let's go. The logical place to start seemed like the Pokemon world, as that's where this whole thing takes place. Pokemon of the same species can obviously breed together as long as they are different genders. The offspring is going to be made from a sperm and an egg cell. It is going to be the same species as the parent, and it's going to have about 50% of each of its parents' DNA. Just basic biology. However, if the parents are different species, the offspring will always be the same species as the mother. This seems to indicate that the mother is going to be providing slightly more of the DNA than the father. This could be because the homeobox genes that determine how the animal or Pokemon is going to develop are located on the X chromosome and not the Y chromosome. The X chromosome will be provided by the mother in both male and female offspring, but in female offspring, where they have two X chromosomes, the mother's X chromosome is actually able to override some of the genes of the father's, similar to how X-linked diseases can be overcome in the real world. Alternatively, the answer could lie in epigenetics. I've talked about epigenetics on the channel before in the How Did TMs Work video, so if you want to go watch that, please feel free. To summarize, most living things share a lot of the same genes, but it's when, where, and how strongly or how much of the product of these genes is made that determines pretty much everything about you, and is why you look very different from a banana which shares around 50% of your DNA. Or hell, a chimpanzee that shares around 99% of your DNA. Epigenetics is basically just genes being switched on or off in certain places at certain times to make changes happen. How this would apply to Pokemon breeding is that because the mother provides much more to the offspring than the father does, certain epigenetic changes happen that make the offspring the same species as the mother rather than the father. If you followed along to all that, well done. I'm not even entirely sure what I just said there. So, any two Pokemon within the same egg group are capable of breeding. I've talked about that kind of stuff before. Again, I've got videos on the channel about it. But for two things to be able to breed successfully in our world, they need to be genetically similar enough, essentially, for it to work. A key component of that is that they have to share the same or very similar numbers of chromosomes for the offspring to be viable. For example, horses have 64 chromosomes, so 32 pairs, while donkeys have 62 chromosomes, 31 pairs, and a mule made from a donkey and a horse is going to have 63 chromosomes and is infertile because not all of its chromosomes are paired. Again, there's other reasons, and there's speciation genes and a bunch of other stuff, but this is sort of like a simplified version. So if we say that Mew is the ancestor of all Pokemon, and all Pokemon share a lot of the same DNA because of it, that's why they're all genetically similar enough to sort of interbreed. But if you just look at it like that, why aren't all Pokemon able to breed together? The only real solution I have to that right now would be that Pokemon in the same egg group share the same number of chromosomes, whereas Pokemon in other egg groups either have more or less, and that's why it works that way. Just naturally they lost them or gained them over time as they evolved separately. So to kind of summarize a little, what I'm saying is all Pokemon are very genetically similar. Pokemon within the same egg groups all share the same number of chromosomes, and that the offspring are the same species as the mother, just because as the mother provides a lot more to the offspring than the father does, certain genes are switched on or off through epigenetic changes to basically activate the genes necessary for the Pokemon to be one species and not the other, basically. We are not even 5 minutes in, and already we're heavy, we're thick with speculative science. Fade out the black. So now we've had a little dive into the speculative realm of Pokemon science, let's come back to the real world. We can have a look at some actual science to sort of fill in the gaps and actually try to answer the question we have spent 5 minutes not bothering to answer, even though it's in the title of the video. We can have a look at the mechanisms of speciation to basically just see why this whole thing is possible. These are reproductive barriers that two animals must overcome in order to have an offspring, and are the forms of isolation that can lead to new species being formed. They can either be pre-zygotic, so before the act of conception, or post-zygotic, so once the, I guess, blastocyst has been made. Simply by looking at the situation we're getting ourselves into, I think pre-zygotic is probably the most important ones to look at, so we'll start with that. Firstly is habitat. Do they live together? No, one of them lives in the sea. Behavior. Do they have, similar mating rituals or habits, like the birds of paradise and their dances? I think it's very unlikely, honestly. I'm not sure why. Temporal. So, do they share the same mating seasons? Do they come out at the same time of day, for example? Is one nocturnal whereas the other? Do they produce gametes at the same time of year? Stuff like that, really. It seems like Pokemon, quite similar to humans, can produce gametes any time of year and are probably constantly producing / releasing sperm and egg cells, rather than having, specific times of year when they can breed. So for this one, it's actually kind of a yes. Mechanical. Do they have compatible sex organs, etc.? Well, as I said in a previous video from this series, I believe that all Pokemon have a unisex cloacary hole, which their gametes, their sperm, or their egg can go through. So, a bit more on that later, really. Lastly is the gametes themselves. We're gonna just go ahead and assume that because your biological gender is determined by whether you produce sperm or eggs, that they carried that same definition over to Pokemon. So males in Pokemon produce sperm, females in Pokemon produce eggs, and the genderless Pokemon produce their own unique gamete. Yeah, we're gonna just assume that all sperm and eggs are compatible in this world. Post-zygotic barriers are mostly about hybrid viability and fertility, stuff like that. As Pokemon don't hybridize, it's not really important. Think back to the old mule honky thing. The biggest obstacle here is sort of the most obvious one, and the thing that makes this whole situation so disturbing is their size difference. If a Skitty is this big, then a Wailord is this big. And this is a human for scale. Little me. Now, as you can see, one is clearly bigger than the other. But the important thing to remember is that the size of each Pokemon's cells are about the same. And it's just the number of these cells that makes up the difference in each Pokemon's size. One has a lot more than the other. And this is also true for the gametes, those sperm and egg cells. They're going to be about the same size in both of these different Pokemon, regardless of the size of the Pokemon overall. I tried to find real-world examples to show you this. Unfortunately, I couldn't find the size of cat, sperm and egg cells, but I could find whale, human, and fly, so we'll compare those instead. This is the sperm whale. The average size of a sperm whale is about 65 feet and 62 tons. Basically, they're bloody massive. The average size of a sperm whale sperm is 41 micrometers, and the average size of a sperm whale ovum or egg cell is around 100 to 200 micrometers. This is a human. In England, the average size of a man is around 5'9", and the average size of a woman is around 5'3". So yeah, we're a lot smaller than the sperm whale. However, the average size of a human sperm is around 50 micrometers, and the average size of a human ovum is around 100 micrometers. So we actually have larger sperm than sperm whales, and our eggs are about the same size. Now let's compare that to Drosophila, the fruit fly, whose sperm is around 6 centimeters long. The average size of a fruit fly is 3 millimeters. Explain that to me. How can its sperm be so much larger than its actual body? If I was to put a fruit fly on the screen right now, it wouldn't even show up, but its sperm is over 1,000 times larger than ours. What is this goddamn madness? Well, that is very interesting. Anyway, back to the topic at hand. What this means is that there's no real reason the sperm and egg cells of a Wailord and a Skitty wouldn't be able to actually work together. You could look at the different sizes. Humans and whales have a very similar size sperm and egg. Therefore, there's no real reason why a cat and a whale wouldn't also be able to have similar sized and therefore potentially compatible sperm and egg cells. So if we go back to the issue of size, the only real issue is potentially the size of their sex organs, so their cloacae unisex hole trademark. While looking at it, it would seem obvious that the Wailord would have a massive hole. I don't even know. Fuck. I honestly don't have a solid answer for this bit. Most likely, yeah. The hole which the sperm would enter or exit through on the Wailord and the Skitty must not be too dissimilar in size, however odd that may appear. And it's coincidences like that that just, I guess, make up this whole situation. I mean, my overall thoughts are that this is something that's never going to happen in nature. It's something that can uniquely happen in the daycare, simply because, like I said, via coincidence, the two Pokemon are similar enough to allow it to happen. And this is the only place where it's ever actually going to occur. The system for sperm egg reproduction has evolved separately many times in nature, and it's just one of those examples of convergent evolution because it works better than any other system. And if again we assume that Mew is the ancestor of both of these Pokemon and that they just happen to be similar enough and happen to share the same amount of chromosomes and happen to have gametes similar enough sizes that are compatible, and Pokemon genetics just happens to be flexible enough to allow this, and the system for determining the species of the offspring happens to rest within epigenetics or something to do with the mother, then we get the conditions that would allow interspecies breeding, especially on this particular scale, to work. And like I said, one of them lives in the sea, whereas the other one doesn't. They just happen to be together when they would normally not be, and yeah, coincidentally they're compatible enough for this to be a viable breeding option. Well, that was a fun little roller coaster, wasn't it? Glad to see you've made it this far. Thank you very much for watching. If you have any suggestions for anything else we're gonna do in the future, any video ideas, feel free to leave them down. If you have any suggestions on how you believe this whole thing may work, again, feel free to leave that in the comments. I'd be very interested to read you guys' thoughts on what I've done and what you may be doing in your own Pokemon biology. So this was the end of Season 1 of the Pokeworld Biology. Season 2 is going to come out fairly soon. Hopefully it's going to have nothing to do with breeding. Believe it or not, I'd only planned to make one video on breeding in this season, but people just kept asking me questions, and here we are. We've done an entire series on it. I don't regret a single second. Again, like, subscribe, all that lovely jazz. With all that said, Wooper be out. Goodbye. Much love. Peace.